Hey, this is Christy from Lululemon. I'm at the office checking out what's new, and I'm really excited about these Groove cinch pants. If you've been looking for something a bit looser with a low rise for yoga, then this could be the move for you. They're in that buttery soft Nulu fabric that you probably know from other Groove styles or even Align. But what I love is they're a relaxed silhouette with a cinch at the hem, so you can make them a jogger, a wide leg, and anything in between. They're the new Groove relaxed cinch pants, available now at lululemon.com.
I'm JJ Virgin, PhD dropout, sorry mom, turned 4-time New York Times bestselling author. Yes, I'm a certified nutrition specialist, fitness Hall of Famer, and I speak at health conferences and trainings around the globe. But I'm driven by my insatiable curiosity and love of science to keep asking questions, digging for answers, and sharing the information I uncover with as many people as I can. And that's why I created the Well Beyond 40 podcast, to synthesize and simplify the science of health into actionable strategies to help you thrive. In each episode, we'll talk about what's working in the world of wellness, from personalized nutrition and healing your metabolism to healthy aging and prescriptive fitness. Join me on the journey to better health so you can love how you look and feel right now and have the energy to play full out at 100. Heart disease is the leading killer of women in the United States. Now, we've been told that lowering cholesterol and avoiding fat is key to prevention. Yet cardiovascular issues continue to rise. So what are we missing? Think about it. Despite all of our advancements in medical science, we're popping statins like candy, and more people than ever are suffering from heart disease. Something just doesn't add up. In today's episode, I'm talking with Dr. Aseem Malhotra about the real causes of heart disease. And guess what? It's not what you've been led to believe. We're talking about the role of inflammation, insulin resistance, and yes, even stress in heart health. And we're going to explore why focusing solely on cholesterol might be missing the forest for the trees. Dr. Malhotra is a cardiologist who's been turning heads in the medical community for years. He's been named one of the most influential science and medicine figures in the UK, alongside Stephen Hawking, and has enlisted celebrities like Jamie Oliver in his crusade to improve public health. His research on the true causes of heart disease has garnered global attention, with his publications achieving one of the highest impact scores worldwide for a doctor. From challenging the sugar industry to taking on big pharma, Dr. Malhotra brings a fresh, evidence-based perspective to cardiovascular health. Dr. Malhotra will share his groundbreaking approach to heart disease prevention and treatment based on years of research and clinical experience. We'll unpack the complexities of medical research, explore the influence of industry on health policies, and discover how targeted lifestyle changes can dramatically impact your heart health. This was a great conversation, and I can't wait for you to listen to it and get a new perspective on heart health that could potentially save your life or the life of someone you love. Dr. Aseem Malhotra, I am super excited to be here in London with you.
Lovely to meet you, JJ.
It's very fun. So when I was coming to London, I was looking at who do I want to make sure that I get to sit down with. Lori Roman, who used to work with Dr. Mark Hyman, said, you must go find Dr. Aseem. And here you are in the flesh. So I am thrilled to be unpacking a lot around heart health, because it isn't something that we've talked much about. And so I know that a lot of what you've talked about, you've got some criticism on public health, and I want to dig into that. Where do you see that in terms of like the dietary guidelines for women and to prevent heart disease? Where are we going wrong?
It's a great question. It's a very big topic, something I've been researching and being an advocate on for well over a decade. To answer that question, I think one needs to try and understand what is at the root cause of heart disease. On the diet side, one thing I realized, certainly since I qualified as a doctor in 2001, is that the traditional thinking, which is still, I think, very prevalent, is that if you eat low-fat foods, then you are going to help prevent heart disease. And that is based upon, again, flawed science, which tells us or tells people that lowering fat means you lower cholesterol, and low cholesterol is the route to preventing heart disease. And I realized quite early on that that was very flawed. And I think one thing people need to acknowledge in terms of how we even change the narrative about modern medicine and medical science is that 50% of what you learn in medical school will turn out to be either outdated or dead wrong within 5 years of your graduation. The trouble is nobody can tell you which half, so you have to learn to learn on your own, because medicine is not an exact science, it never has been. And it's constantly evolving, it's a science of human beings, it's an art. So there was a flaw in the original hypothesis around cholesterol. And then what happened was it got captured and taken over by the big food and big pharma.
Right.
And this is, probably $1 trillion industry beyond even that when it comes to how much money is made from these so-called low-fat foods, which often then replace the fat with sugar, and everyone knows the story around that. So I think we start from that point, and my own independent research published in peer-reviewed journals, in fact, one in 2020 actually showed that even drugs that are very potent at lowering LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, there was no consistent relationship, even from drug company-sponsored clinical trials, with it preventing heart attacks. So for me, and I say this very openly, and I say it to my patients, and I write it in my notes, and no one's been able to challenge me on this because I'm very precise, focusing on lowering cholesterol essentially for the sake of it is a waste of time. Complete waste of time in preventing heart disease. And it's not just a waste of time, there's an indirect effect. If people focus on lowering cholesterol and it's not going to prevent heart attacks, they are going to detract from more meaningful solutions to prevent heart disease, which essentially the big sort of, the biggest cluster or biggest risk factor is insulin resistance. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty clear in the literature. It's just not well publicized, and partly because there's no market for the message. Because how do you combat insulin resistance? Lifestyle, essentially. Dietary changes, eating real food, avoiding refined sugars, refined carbohydrates, moderate exercise, reducing stress. That is essentially the be-all and end-all of tackling, preventing, and even reversing heart disease.
I'm surprised you could even get what you got published.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I first created that so-called controversy in 2013 in the BMJ. And the title of the article, and it was just a commentary, it was peer-reviewed, but 800 words, it was called Saturated Fat is Not the Major Issue. And the BMJ press released it, and I didn't expect it to have the impact it did, but it was the front page of 3 British newspapers. I was on CNN International, Fox News Chicago, all over the world. And I think, I committed in some respects, I'm for the truth, right? And I was trying to advance the discussion. But in some ways, I had committed medical heresy because I had, in that 800-word piece, I'd basically said, we've got it completely wrong about saturated fat. We've got it wrong about cholesterol. We've over-medicated millions of people on statins. And actually, we should be focusing on sugar. So in that piece, that wasn't the intention. I was trying to put the jigsaw together. I'd essentially taken out 2 industries as well as medical dogma. So you can imagine the backlash that happened.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't need a bodyguard on that one. It's
there was
crazy.
a huge backlash actually, but there was also the advancement of the debate, and then more studies started to basically confirm what I had said is to be true, and we are where we are now.
Thank God for your courage. I wrote this book called The Sugar Impact Diet, and when I was writing it, I did a lot of research to try to figure out how we got so wrong in this, low-fat, high-carb situation. And when I dug through it, it was 2 guys. Now I'm trying to remember. It was Ames. No, it was not Ames. There was 2 guys. One guy said everything is because of sugar, basically. Another guy was like everything is because of fat. And he completely discredited the sugar guy.
Yeah, John Yudkin and Ansel Keys.
Yes. Ansel Keys.
Yes.
One of the most problematic people. I'm sure he didn't do it. He wasn't trying to do it. He truly believed it. But boy, did he create a major mess for all of our health.
Absolutely, 100%. And yeah, you're right. I think he genuinely believed what he was saying was correct.
And a huge industry. Think about it. That was back when, and I remember I was in LA at that time and doing nutrition and fitness consulting, and everything was eat as close to 0 fat as possible. I was actually working out at the Pritikin Center, so it was 10% of your calories from fat.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, the sugar industry also funded Ansel Keys, and I think that didn't help the situation as well.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, wow, wow. Okay, so you now, one other question before we get into insulin resistance. How did you start to see all this? You were trained in a very specific thing.
Yeah.
You know, how did you start to go, oh, wow, what if what I learned is not correct?
It's interesting. I think part of my nature has always been somebody that I have a very curious mind. I have always, and maybe I was brought up that way, I've always had a healthy skepticism of authority and power, especially because it's abused. Mm-hmm. And for me, a lot of my advocacy was informed by my patient experience. So I was seeing all these patients. I worked in frontline in the NHS, and I trained in interventional cardiology, which is essentially keyhole heart surgery. But I'm very sensitive to my environment and to suffering around me. And I'm very curious. So I think that combination made me think, hold on, something's not right here. Patients are not getting better, more and more pills. Statistically, we could see heart disease. We had not eradicated heart disease, even though it was predicted by the late 90s that because the cholesterol hypothesis had gained so much traction, there was a prediction when statins came on the market that actually we're now going to see the end of heart disease, and it didn't happen. And because of that, I thought, okay, something's not quite right here. So then I think my curious mind then led me to look into more and more alternatives and other research, and then and think about that carefully with my patients. So that's how I think I went down that road.
So statins are still like this primary intervention, and cholesterol is still the bad guy.
Yeah.
And what can you say to someone? Because I still get pinged all the time on social about this.
Yeah.
How can you help someone see that this maybe isn't the right direction so they feel more comfortable about it? Because I still think there's a lot of fear around it, and that I need to be on a statin.
Yeah. So it needs a conversation. I think if people want resources, one of the best mediums in a easy to understand, concise fashion probably is the third book I wrote, which is called A Statin-Free Life, where I talk people through it. But essentially, I think we start from a position of understanding that cholesterol is essential for life. Without cholesterol, we would die. It has so many important functions, whether it's hormone synthesis, whether it's important for brain cognitive function, it's important in the immune system. So if we start from that, actually cholesterol is something that we produce naturally. So it has a role to play. So we start from there. I think the next thing is then to help people understand that a lot of the current belief system around cholesterol was based upon flawed science, and then talk them through that. And then give them an alternative, that they can focus on around their dietary patterns. I think with the cholesterol issue, it's a little bit more nuanced. The traditional thinking has been there's a bad cholesterol and good cholesterol. LDL, we need to keep that as low as possible to prevent heart disease. But actually, when you look at all of the data, the most predictive aspect of cholesterol profile for heart disease is your triglycerides and your HDL within the cholesterol profile. So you want your triglycerides to be less than your HDL. And the best way to achieve that from
you want your triglycerides to be less than your HDL?
Ideally, yes. Ideally.
So where do you like to see? Is it just that's less, or are there specific numbers you're looking for?
Yeah, actually, I think it's a bit complicated because in the UK we use millimoles per liter, but I think in the US you use milligrams per deciliter. So I know both.
Because I was like going, wow, that's really low triglycerides and high. Mine actually are, but I think that might be.
Yeah, when you convert it to millimoles, which you can do, then you want the ratio probably will look better.
Right.
But essentially you want your triglycerides to be less than 150 milligrams per deciliter, if I remember correctly, in the US units.
Yeah, which I think is still too high.
Yeah. And your HDL, I agree. And your HDL should be above 50 milligrams per deciliter.
Okay. Yeah, and we do it as a ratio.
Yeah, if you got it there, then you're in pretty good shape.
So as long as it's a 3-to-1, but ideally more like a 2-to-1 ratio.
Absolutely.
Are there other markers beyond triglycerides and HDL that you would recommend looking at?
Absolutely. HbA1c. So you want you not to be pre-diabetic, essentially, right? So you want your HbA1c to be normal.
And what do you consider normal?
In UK units, less than 5.7%.
We're the same.
Yeah, fine. So less than 5.7%. So actually,
but where do you really want someone to be?
Well, it's interesting because I think we can get a bit obsessed about this over focusing on biomarkers, thinking that if it's, is a 5 better than a 5.2, probably doesn't make much difference. They're kind of, I think there's a spectrum, and as long as you're in less than 5.7, to be honest, it's going to vary from person to person. And then the other thing that's really important is blood pressure. So you want your blood pressure to be ideally less than 120/80. Above 120/80, you get into pre-hypertension, and then it becomes mild hypertension, so high blood pressure. So less than 120/80 is good. So if your blood pressure is less than 120/80, your HbA1c is less than 5.7, your triglycerides and HDL normal, and then your waist circumference for a Caucasian female should be less than 90 centimeters around the belly button.
We'll translate that into inches.
That will probably be around, so it's 2.5 centimeters to an inch, isn't it? So
math on the fly.
35, roughly.
So I like to do, you should be half or more your height.
That's another way of looking, absolutely,
Yeah,
100%.
Well, and it's because being 6 feet tall, I always went, surely my ideal waist circumference is not the same as a woman who's 5 feet tall. This makes no sense. But
yeah.
And tell everyone why it's so important to look at a waist circumference.
So it's an indirect marker of essentially belly fat, and your belly fat, stomach fat, is an indicator of risk, because visceral fat, the intra-abdominal fat, is a substrate for chronic inflammation in the body, essentially, which is not good, because heart disease actually, I published a paper in 2017 in one of the BMJ journals. And again, that created big news headlines because there were two cardiologists.
You're just a troublemaker, aren't you?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I actually write for the sake of having impact, otherwise I don't bother. It's not for the sake of publication. Like, if I'm going to say something and I believe in it and I've spent time on it, then I will do everything I can to maximize the impact of that. And often that involves the journal press releasing it. In fact, that broke the record, interestingly, for the journal, like more than 1 million downloads for a medical journal article.
Wow.
But this time, it wasn't Aseem Malhotra on his own. I had 2 editors of medical journals who were both cardiologists. So Pascal Meyer was the editor of BMJ, Open Heart, and then Rita Redberg, actually. She is probably the most eminent female cardiologist in the world. So she was editor of JAMA Internal Medicine. She's based in California. And I spoke to them and said, yeah, we need to do this article. And part of that article, again, was saying that we've overdone it on cholesterol. And actually, we need to understand that heart disease is a chronic inflammatory condition, which can be best managed with lifestyle changes.
Now,
that was really
the
title. Yeah.
Being a lifestyle person, I love this. I feel like finally the exercise physiologists and nutritionists are the rock stars here.
Yeah.
Too bad we can't create some kind of prescription patent, something around us. Are you doing anything to assess inflammation directly?
Yeah. So interestingly, insulin resistance and inflammation tend to go together. So if you sort out the insulin resistance, get your markers in the right range, we call that metabolic health. In general, for a lot of people who are in the abnormal range, if they've got, and I'll talk about the inflammatory markers in a second, once they correct that with dietary changes, for example, then the inflammatory markers tend to get better. Probably the most important, there are lots of inflammatory markers you can use, and there's also a little bit of a culture which we have to be careful of over-testing and doing lots and lots of tests, because, one of the most important things we learn in medical school, don't organize a test unless it's going to change your management plan, right? But I think one of the most reliable ones is high sensitivity CRP, C-reactive protein, and that's quite a sensitive marker of chronic inflammation. So if that's also normal, and your metabolic markers are also normal, you're probably at very, very, very low risk of developing heart disease in your life.
And you're one of the few in the US at this point.
Yes.
It's, it's less than 7%. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
And are you looking at fasting insulins as well, or no? Are you assuming...
You can do that too. That's a good point. I think that's an extra one to add in. Fasting insulin can be very helpful too.
Yeah, I always feel like, when they're looking at blood sugar, if we looked at insulin, we'd see it before we'd see it on the blood sugar.
That's true.
See it on. So...
insulin resistance and a raised fasting insulin can predate type 2 diabetes for by 20 years.
I love all this because I know one of the fastest ways to improve insulin sensitivity is just get people to exercise. So it makes me thrilled. What is your recommendations? Because I know you also wrote a book, POP or PIPI?
Yeah, my first diet was POP diet, yeah.
Okay.
which is based upon actually the home of the Mediterranean diet, where Ansel Keys spent a lot of time doing his research.
Ah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us about the diet and what you would, someone coming to you now, what would you, that has, let's say they've got their hemoglobin A1C is 6,
Yeah.
they've got a big waist circumference. Are you doing more advanced body composition? Are you looking at DEXAs?
No, I don't feel I need to.
You got enough from the waist?
Yeah, because I think, again, for me, one of the things I'm very conscious of, JJ, and it's a big issue, is medical and healthcare practitioners, and I say this broadly, exploiting patients for money, right? Now, you can have a mindset where you think actually it's good to do lots of tests, but if you know your stuff well, then actually I try and minimize the amount of tests that people need, so that because the management plan is going to be the same anyway. So I don't tend to do all that stuff because I get them on a plan, and of course people can do that if they're interested. There's no issue. There's no necessary harm from it. But I don't think you need to do it for most people.
Yeah, you can pretty much guess it if they've got a big waist circumference.
Absolutely.
So they come in, they have that. What do you recommend?
So first of all, I think, in the Piopi Diet book and even my second book, The Immunity Plan, one of the narratives that needs to change, and I'm sure you know this very well, JJ, is that people's health markers of disease, and heart disease in particular, actually can get rapidly improved just within a few weeks of changing diet, 21 days actually. I've had patients who have sent their type 2 diabetes into remission in 21 to 28 days of just diet, not exercise, just diet. I'm not saying exercise isn't good, it's important, but that's the biggest impact on your metabolic health
biggest
markers.
lever. I like doing that first too, because if you give them both, they do nothing. So
no, of course.
Right.
And also I think sometimes actually if you especially people who are quite overweight, and I'm sure you have a lot more experience in this space than I do with the exercise side, is actually sometimes the over-exercising and the diet stuff, it can be not very good for their body, their joints. So it's like, get to a kind of healthier weight, and then actually the movement becomes easier, right? Because otherwise injuries, all that kind of stuff can happen, right? So I keep the exercise quite simple initially, to say just do 30 minutes of a brisk walk a day or whatever else, just keep it simple, focus on the diet. So my default diet, and there are different approaches to this, when you look at it from a heart disease perspective, I call it a low carb. When I say low carb, I mean refined carb. And people still, I recommend lots of vegetables and low sugar fruits. A low refined carbohydrate Mediterranean diet. So eliminate the refined starches and the sugar. Focus on anti-inflammatory foods which have an evidence base behind them, right? Nutrition science, unfortunately, is not great in terms of the literature for lots of reasons, but the stuff that's there's enough to tell us that, extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds, omega-3s from oily fish, a mixture of whole fruit and vegetables. If you get that as your sort of staple diet, you eliminate the refined carbs, then I've got no issue with people having cheese or steak or whatever else, And that tends to work for patients.
Yeah, I mean, that's like my diet too. It's very simple. Yeah. It's not hard.
No.
Eat protein first, get your vegetables in, eat some healthy fats.
That's it.
Done. A little bit of fruit.
100%.
Have you been following the latest, I don't know if it's just in the States, some research article came out about omega-3s being bad for your heart health?
I haven't seen that, but interestingly, when I looked at the literature when I wrote my books that was there, and I was hoping that we would see it, overall, the evidence base on omega-3 supplements doesn't seem to show, when you look at all the evidence, doesn't seem to show much impact on heart disease. And one of the reasons for that, JJ, could be that the benefits of omega-3 seem to be in the foods with the synergy of the omega-3 with other foods, for example. Something else within the fish, maybe the olive oil as well. So I think that may be a reason why it's not on its own, doesn't seem to have very clear impact. But if some of the patients, for example, if you're vegan or whatever else, or they may...
Or they hate fish or
whatever, then fine. I don't see any harm from it. But I haven't seen that latest research on that.
Yeah, it is so hard with nutrition research to keep everything the same. You have to put them in a metabolic ward. So that's the other part. You look at it and go, did they do an omega-3 index? But there was all this blow up around this. It's like, I think I had a son with a traumatic brain injury who we basically brought back using high dose fish oil.
Amazing.
And I think we just can optimize that. But if you're eating a lot of fish, great, but most of our people aren't.
No, they're not.
So there you go.
And also, you've got to look at the funding of these. Sometimes, I mean, you know, who benefits from telling people omega-3 supplements are no good? Well, it can benefit the pharmaceutical industry. So, well, okay, you can take a statin instead, right? So you've got to look, there's all these other sort of factors at play and some of this literature, which becomes obviously very confusing for people.
Yes, I know. I think if you were an alien and you came down to this planet and you walked into a bookstore and went to the diet section, what the heck would you do?
Sure.
It's ridiculous. Where if you really look at the foundation of all of them, it's eat real food first.
100%. Absolutely.
So let's just all agree on that.
Yeah, again, it's ultra-processed food, right? 60% of the calories in the US, same in the UK, coming from ultra-processed foods, which are designed by the food industry to be hyper-palatable, probably addictive, you know, and are going to cause you chronic disease, which is great for big pharma.
We were amazed, though. We went to a grocery store yesterday, and my husband pointed out, he goes, we're in this grocery store, and we're in the middle aisles, and it's refrigerated and real food. And way in the back was some food that was processed, but it wasn't even the ultra-processed garbage. I'm like, I mean, even our Whole Foods and Sprouts don't have that. Yeah. They still have all this junk food posing as health food, which I think is even worse because people think they're in a safe space, right?
Absolutely. No, that, again, that's another, you know, it highlights the fact that this is predominantly, the obesity epidemic is predominantly a food environment problem.
Well, how could it not be? Look at the 1900s. Yeah. Like, that's when I was writing Sugar Impact Diet. It was the average person ate 5 pounds of sugar a year. There were no ultra-processed foods. And now it's 150 pounds. Yeah. Like, you know, and I still remember when I was raised on Pop-Tarts and Captain Crunch and Cocoa Puffs.
So was I.
So, right? We got through it. I rebelled at
When you're taking on the tough jobs, gear up with Venom steel gloves and defend your hands from grime, grease, and muck. They're 70% thicker than common disposable gloves with heavy-duty 2-layer nitrile protection, including a black outer layer and a white inner layer that provides chemical and rip resistance. Great for all your painting, plumbing, automotive, and DIY projects.
12. What about, so for women, because I know, you know, once women go through menopause, and I'm just wondering, my hypothesis is the reason women are at higher risk for heart disease postmenopausal is because of the Women's Health Initiative, that if they are replacing hormones well, that their risk would be the same as likely. I don't know if that's right or not. But women's signs of heart disease or heart attack, how does this differ from men?
That's a good question. So the classic symptoms of heart disease, certainly angina, which is a symptom of a blockage that is likely there in your heart arteries, which manifests itself with a discomfort, usually with exercise relieved by rest. The classic symptom is a central chest heaviness that may go into, so not left-sided. So left-sided pain, interesting, is what we call atypical. That's not typical heart pain. Central chest heaviness that goes up into the neck, down the arms, for example. With women, it can sometimes present differently. It can actually be on the left side, etc. It can be in the stomach. So the way we normally, when we take a history, I mean, 80% of your diagnosis in medicine comes from the conversation. We call it the history. If you're a good doctor, the bad doctors do not take good histories and rely on tests, and then the tests can be flawed, and it takes a long time to get. So good doctors know 80% of your diagnosis will come from the conversation, asking the right questions, in terms of understanding what the symptoms are. So usually with women, again, I would take the history, what kind of pain or discomfort you're getting. Is it happening with stress or with exercise, even if it's left-sided? But again, also, do they have any risk factors? So if you've got like a 40-year-old woman who is slim, is not got high blood pressure, no family history, non-smoker, and comes with chest pain, the first thing, before I've even gone into detail about the chest pain, I am almost excluding the likelihood of it being heart. So you have to look at all of that together.
And what role do hormones play?
Our traditional thinking on, so up until the menopause, women tend to get very low heart disease rates compared to men. And that's why still, on average, women live about 10 years longer than men do, right? Because heart disease usually is the bigger killer in older age. That seems, once they hit the menopause, the rates of heart disease then start to level out a little bit, tend to become similar to men. And the thinking is estrogen is protective. So that's probably the reason, I think, more than anything else. Estrogen probably has a protective role. Now, does hormone replacement therapy have some protection? Again, it's a controversial area. We seem to think there is evidence that it does, but now it's being contradicted. So it's difficult to know, for sure, to be honest. I wouldn't have an answer for you on that right now. But
Yes.
sorry. But of course, the stuff we're talking about is actually the most important anyway, the lifestyle stuff.
Right. Everything that's going to improve insulin sensitivity.
Absolutely.
Which, like, I think of three things. Change your diet, and again, just what you described. Do resistance training, because now your muscles can soak up the glucose, and sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Sleep and chronic stress, big one, which is ignored. I think it's going to get a lot more attention as we move forward in the next few years, but that's a really, really important one, actually.
Yeah, I think the challenge has always been, you can measure muscle, you can measure, and like all these other things are very easy to measure. And now we're starting to have some ways we can measure stress. At least we have HRV, at least we have some things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, to be honest, with the way society is at the moment, my default now, almost all the patients I speak to, all the women who've had heart attacks or whatever, the default is they are super stressed. Right?
And how are you just getting that from talking to them?
Yeah, so I think there is definitely some validity in the subjective, discussion. I start with a very basic question. On a scale of 0 to 10, how bad are your stress levels in the last few years? And I say 0 being no stress, think of a Buddhist monk meditating on a mountain.
Yeah,
and 10 being very high levels. And almost everybody, JJ, is above a 7. And then, okay, what are you doing about it? And they're not really doing anything. So then we have to get a little bit more into that. One of the things I do prescribe is meditation and breath work. The strongest data we have on heart disease reversal actually is meditation.
Really?
So there was a paper published in one of the Indian journals, and I actually went to meet this cardiologist, and we'll come on later on to my documentary, this will come out in my documentary. But it was called the Mount Abu Heart Trial. So the cardiologist in India in the early 2000s, he took several hundred patients who were diagnosed, and male and female, diagnosed with at least moderate to severe blockages. So they had at least a 50 to 70% narrowing in their blood vessels, in their coronary arteries. For some reason, they either couldn't afford or didn't want a stent or a bypass operation. He put them on a healthy lifestyle program. No drugs involved, really, pre-statins. And that lifestyle program in India, because a lot of them were devout Hindus, involved a high fiber vegetarian diet, 2 30-minute brisk walks a day for exercise, and something called Raj Yoga meditation. And then he repeated their coronary angiograms after a couple of years. And in the people that had adhered to the lifestyle plan, there was an average reduction in the narrowing of 20%, which is unheard of. If you ask most cardiologists, can you reverse blockages? They'll say, no, that's not possible. And this is what happened. So then he did a deep dive and looked at was it the diet, was it the exercise, or was it the meditation? By far, the only independent predictor of reversal of the blockages was 40 minutes of Raj Yoga meditation per day. Now, that involved a form of breath work, but actually it was much more than that, which comes out in the documentary. It was almost like a spiritual transformation. It was about thinking about how you process stress, anger, your relationships with your family, with your partner, all of that. And even got their family members involved, and they spent a week in this ashram, if you like, in India to help them understand how the mindset is actually affecting heart disease. It's extraordinary. And we have biological mechanisms of how this happens. Lancet published a paper in 2020. They took subjective stress scores on people, and these are young, healthy people, and they correlated that with an MRI scan of the brain, looking at an isotope that essentially became lit up in the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. And then they measured inflammatory markers in the blood, and there was a perfect correlation. And then also that correlated with outcomes in terms of heart attacks. So chronic stress essentially increases clotting factors and inflammatory markers in the blood.
Gosh, it'd be great to do a repeat study of that where the only variable was the meditation.
Absolutely. 100%. That needs to be done.
I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And this guy in India actually did a randomized control trial, because I said,
how do you randomize control meditation?
Well, what he did was he basically did 2 groups where he put them on usual care, and then one group with the lifestyle plan, which included meditation. And this is not the original study he published.
So one was with the lifestyle and the other one included the meditation.
Yes, essentially. And he followed them up and he found there was a significant improvement. I said, why have you not published this? Well, he basically said that, there's a resistance within the medical journals because they're all captured by pharma. Right. And he said, I remember when I had a chat with him, he told me that it was one of the American heart groups, I can't remember the AHA, they came to see him in India and he presented their data. And words to the effect, he was told politely that this is not going to get published because it will affect the stent business.
Well, let's talk about your documentary. This needs to come out. I'm super excited about this. This is a great lead up to what you have done here. This First Do No Farm, which is a great name, and that's PHARM.
Yes.
So let's talk about this documentary and what's in it.
So my work over the last 10 years, other than trying to change the paradigm on heart disease, is also trying to understand what in the system is suppressing good quality information for patients to improve their health. And in that journey, JJ, I discovered that essentially, the top line, if you like, is that medical knowledge is under commercial control, but most doctors don't know that. So what does
they not know that? They know where their education's funded by, right?
Well, they think that the information that they use to make clinical decisions on, say, a particular drug has gone through a process of approval by regulators, even though they know drug companies are there to make money. But what they don't know is that they design the clinical, a lot of them don't know this, that drug companies design the trials themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And what happens is, and this will be exposed in the documentary in a more detailed fashion, is that, and people will probably find this really extraordinary, before the drug companies have even done the trial on the drug themselves and conducted the clinical trial on drug, they say, we've got this drug, how do we want to market this? How many people do we want? How much money do we want to make? So they start from there.
They reverse engineer it.
They reverse engineer it. They then design the trials. They do their own analyses. They hold on to the raw data. And what they do is they give the summary results of those trials, and often the raw data is thousands and thousands of pages, which needs independent verification but never happens. They give the summary results to the regulators. Our regulators only rely on the summary results, but also there's another bias. They get most of their funding now from pharma. So the FDA gets 65% of its funding from pharma. The regulator in the UK gets 86% of its funding from pharma. In Australia, it's 96%. It's crazy. Again, most doctors don't know this. I gave a talk a couple of years ago, and the chair of the British Medical Association came to my talk, and he didn't even believe, he was gobsmacked when I showed information from an investigation in the British Medical Journal showing these conflicts. He couldn't believe it even. This is the chairman of the British Medical Association. So a lot of this is ignorance. And then what happens is the regulators approve those drugs, and then doctors think, and then another way of bias is the way the data is presented in the medical journals is also biased as well, where they underplay the. So ultimately, what happens is the way that the data is produced will grossly exaggerate the safety and the benefits of that drug. So there's no informed consent going on. Then you've got the doctor in the consultation room prescribing the pill, whether it's a statin or a blood pressure pill or a diabetes drug, and the patient is completely misinformed. So the way I describe it is that we have a pandemic of misinformed doctors and misinformed and unwittingly harmed patients. And the factors behind it are biased funding of research that's funded because it's likely to be profitable, not beneficial for patients, biased reporting in medical journals, biased reporting in the media, biased patient pamphlets, commercial conflicts of interest, and then an inability of doctors to understand and then communicate health statistics. Imagine all of those layers resulting in a patient taking a pill that if they were fully informed, JJ, in many, if not most cases, would not take the pill. And then we're not even telling them about lifestyle. So this is a mess. This is... and
yet when I go and speak at a medical conference on diet and lifestyle, I have to disclose if I'm hooked up with a nutrition with the supplement company. Like, I have to disclose everything.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm questioned. It's
and
wild.
you're questioned by people who are actually even, listen, we've all got conflicts. It's part of, we've got biases, we've got conflicts. We declare them, we understand them, we acknowledge them, etc. That's important. But what's happening here is likely you are maybe getting, criticized, let's just say, by people with much greater conflicts of interest, right? And that's again part of the corporate strategy. Is it's big corporations is there's the John Cleese, who was Monty Python. He tweeted something once which was quite funny, but had many truths behind it. He said one of the old rules of the KGB: always accuse your enemy of exactly what you were doing.
Ooh.
So I know all of the tactics. So when you do this stuff in my advocacy, you get pushback, but I know exactly what they're doing, and that empowers me a little bit. Say, okay, you got to grow a rhinoceros.
I just think we need a bodyguard with you at all times.
Yeah, well,
We said the same to Dr. Joe Dispenza because, when he started to show that he could use meditation and COVID wouldn't enter the cells, we're like, of course, that didn't get published.
Sure.
Yes. Wow, that's just
very
crazy.
dark forces.
Well, and the bigger challenge with all of that too that you hear, and I'm just going to bring it back because I think a lot of the viewers will relate to the Women's Health Initiative that really took women, a whole generation of women, and took them out of getting the hormone replacement therapy they needed with the media reporting this. And never, when this all comes out and it's been found to be incorrect and the data was one more person got breast cancer who was on the drug than not, and they just lied with statistics, which we all know how to do once you take one statistics class.
Yes.
Right? But, where's the culpa?
Where's the acceptance, accountability?
Where is it? Where do we come back out and say this?
Absolutely, 100%. And this is why in the documentary we're saying that we go very deep in the documentary. We're basically saying that what people need to understand is that the system, the current economic system that has been created by policies that probably well-intentioned, but was to try and allow, in this mindset that we create a completely free market where we deregulate big companies and the market will correct itself. Yeah, so I think people need to understand that first and foremost, drug companies have a legal obligation to make profit for their shareholders, not to give you the best treatment, although most people would think that to be the case. And a major part of the scandal is that those with a responsibility to scientific integrity in patients, doctors, academic institutions, and medical journals, they collude with industry for financial gain. But if you go to the root of it, what's happening is those corporations, big corporations, we can apply it to big food as well.
We call it big food, big pharma, big healthcare, big insurance.
They are pathologically self-interested when it comes to extracting money, and that means they will lie for profit, even if it causes harm to people. And that's really what people need to understand. But that we have kind of been unwittingly complicit in this system because it's happened in some ways behind the scenes. But policies that were implemented with good intentions from the likes of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in the 80s to really deregulate these corporations has given them so much power through this fraudulent sort of mechanism of making money that now we have to really row back and change the system back to just greater transparency. Something very simple, which doesn't matter what political ideology you have. People just want clean information. We don't have that in healthcare anymore. The information has been curated to manipulate people, to exploit them for financial gain. And that's why we've got a healthcare crisis. That's why we've got a deteriorating mental health crisis. So once we expose that, that people identify the problem first and foremost, then we can offer solutions to change it. And it needs laws. It needs laws to protect people from these excesses and manipulations. It's very straightforward, actually. And one simple solution, JJ, would be all clinical trial data conducted by drug companies, they can develop drugs, but they should no longer be allowed to test them.
Right, that seems obvious.
They can't be trusted. They should be independently verified. And if they think their product is so great, why not get independent verification?
Right, they'd want to. They'd want everyone to test it.
Exactly.
Because they just look better and better and better.
And it's self-defeating because it doesn't encourage innovation. Most new drugs now are copies of old ones. What they do is they take an old, off-patent drug, they change a few molecules here or there, they then give it another name, they market it, in a different way, they make, God knows, billions of dollars, and then they move on to the next drug, and while simultaneously, hiding the data on harms. And it's no surprise that one credible estimate now suggests, and this is pre-pandemic, the third most common cause of death after heart disease and cancer globally is prescribed medications, what your doctor prescribes for you, because of side effects.
So if you look at this and, we take cancer out because I think that's a toxic soup over there. But
Yeah.
if we looked at just heart disease and then prescription drugs and went,
Yeah.
if you were approaching heart disease the way you've described it, you wouldn't need the prescription drugs.
No.
If you went through all of this and just did it in the way of diet and lifestyle, you would save a lot of money.
Yes.
You know, you'd have better quality of life.
Yeah.
It really can be that simple.
It's a win-win. It's a win-win. And that's the conversation I have with my patients, and they get it. And when they go on the plan or whatever, I empower them with a lifestyle plan, and they notice the benefits very quickly, they're more likely to sustain it. But again, this will only take us so far, JJ, because the system is still working against them. And even with the food stuff, a lot of people fall off the wagon. I'm sure you have patients that kind of, you know, they do really well initially and then they start regaining weight because the environment is encouraging them actually to be sick, you know,
Yeah.
and they're having to constantly battle the environment. So, you know, and that brings us also to an understanding that, okay, modern medicine has had an important role to play, but if you look at the increase in life expectancy that we've had in the last 150 years, we've added about 40 years. Average life expectancy in 1850 was about 40 years old. Now we're 80, although it's going downhill, right, in America now. Of those 40 years, you can attribute maybe 3.5 to 5 years maximum to modern medicine. Most of the increase in life expectancy actually happened through an understanding. Yeah, absolutely. Safe drinking water, seatbelts in cars, safer work environments. People just die at work, you know, because there was no health and safety, and you know, smoke-free buildings, you know, all that kind of stuff. And they were people that I know this, that partly because industry has been behind it. They've created this narrative that the word regulation is a bad thing. Actually, you know, we function cohesively in a society because laws have been created for the greater good for people. Even things like, simple things like traffic lights, seatbelts in cars, these are regulatory interventions. People don't like people interfering with their lives and their freedoms, and that's fine, I get it. But collectively as a society, we should think, hold on, what is actually for the greater good of us all? And that needs implementation through laws a lot of the time. That's it. You know, that's all we need to talk about.
Well, I thank you for all of this. This is some seriously courageous work. I would imagine that as you started to see it, you couldn't unsee it.
Yes.
And so, you know, but not everyone would be compelled to go out there and do something about it. So thank you for doing something about it. And again, as I listen to all of this, the bottom line is it's actually very simple.
Yeah.
Health is actually very simple. We've just complicated it all up here. We don't have to.
Yeah, and I think just one other thing to say as well, JJ, is that, you know, the World Health Organization have been under a lot of heat recently for different reasons, which I won't go into, but their original definition of health I love, 1946, a state of complete mental, physical, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So for me, my purpose, and I think everybody's purpose actually, really, in life, is to reach a state where we can flourish and have, you know, optimal for us, mental, physical, social well-being, but they're intertwined. You can't have optimal mental health without having optimal physical health, and you can't have optimal physical health without having optimal mental health. And part of having optimal mental health actually is also coming to a place of even spirituality, of thinking about behaving and acting in an ethical way. Mm-hmm. And that means speaking the truth and not being afraid to speak the truth. Our system has now created a culture where people are afraid to speak the truth. That is not conducive to a healthy society.
So we would love to support you both in our Well Beyond 40 community and our Mindshare community. Where can people learn more about everything you've got going on?
That's very kind, thank you. So I have a website called, it's just draseem.com, as in Dr. D-O-C-T-O-R, Aseem.com.
A-S-E-E-M.
A-S-E-E-M. I'm on Twitter. I'm quite active on Twitter as just Dr. Aseem Malhotra. And then for the movie, we've got a landing page where people can support us. And it's nofarmfilm.com, N-O-farm, P-H-A-R-M, film.com. We're hoping to get the movie out in September. We're still in a situation where we still need a little bit more funding to really maximize distribution impact, etc. But we're getting there, and we've got some amazing people who are involved and interviewed within the doco.
Perfect. We'll put that all at jjvirgin.com/Aseem, A-S-E-E-M.
Correct.
And thank you again.
Thank you.
Be sure to join me next time for more tools, tips, and techniques you can incorporate into everyday life to ensure you look and feel great and are built to last. Check me out on Instagram, Facebook, and my website, jjvirgin.com. And make sure to follow my podcast at subscribetojj.com so you don't miss a single episode. And hey, if you're loving what you hear, don't forget to leave a review. Your reviews make a big difference in helping me reach more incredible women just like you to spread the word about aging powerfully after 40. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Hey, JJ here, and just a reminder that the Well Beyond 40 podcast offers health, wellness, fitness, and nutritional information that's designed for educational and entertainment purposes only. You should not rely on this information as a substitute for, nor does it replace professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have any concerns or questions about your health, you should always consult with a physician or other healthcare professional. Make sure that you do not disregard, avoid, or delay obtaining medical or health-related advice from your healthcare professional because of something you may have heard on the show or read in our show notes. The use of any information provided on the show is solely at your own risk.